Ramadan content
Yeah.
to us thinking like, I have to be like this for Ramadan. I have to pray every sunnah. You know, I have to make dhikr all day, right? And holding ourselves to unrealistic standards or expectations. Who do you think are the people using the term Ramadan Muslim?
Like in Ramadan, I feel like there's a lot of pressure to succeed and do it properly.
African Americans with like the most Muslim names, you know, like Khalid, Rashid, Abdul Harun. Like you might have the most, you know, Arab name, but then they're like, no, it's actually Khalid. And so I think in those circles I might hear Ramadan Muslim used a little bit more.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Ibtisam.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Tajdeen.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm C.
And welcome to Ruminations podcast, which is a space for open, thoughtful and engaging conversations about Islam, Sufism and diverse experiences about Muslims all across the world. It's a platform where stories flow freely, bridging hearts and minds through meaningful dialogue. Today we'll be discussing the term Ramadan Muslims, talking about how often it's described, how the term is coined to describe those who become more practicing and committed to their faith during the month of Ramadan, despite not maybe adhering strongly beforehand. But like, we want to talk about why this term is used so negatively and why it's weaponized to make individuals feel ashamed or disheartened about their efforts to reconnect with Islam during the month of Ramadan, especially among young people. So let's start with, what does Ramadan Muslims mean to both of you guys?
I think you kind of described a little bit of it. Perhaps it can mean people who only practice Islam during the month of Ramadan, or it could be people who, you know, increase in their practice, which to me that's kind of the point of Ramadan. You should increase in your practice and you should push yourself a little bit more than you would in other times of the year. It could also maybe refer to folks who, you know, are observing the fast, but not really practicing the rest of the tenets. I think of that sometimes as well.
I think for me, the term Ramadan Muslim, I think it might mean more to the people that use it than the people that are described as such, as a Ramadan Muslim. I think obviously the people that are like described as Ramadan Muslims, they're just people that are just trying their best, trying to engage in the month of Ramadan the way that like you know, like we've been taught to, or you know, we want to, and etc. But I think the term Ramadan Muslim, it more comes from a place of like shaming and judgment than it comes from actually wanting people to be better.
Who do you think are the people using the term Ramadan Muslim?
It's just like people that are like kind of judging for people for their before and after of Ramadan. Like before you were like this, during you're like this, and after you're like that. So they kind of obviously put people on a timeline of like what they think isn't like, I don't want to say good enough, but it's like there's shame behind the timeline, their timeline.
And it's mostly Muslims.
I think it is Muslims. In my head I don't really see other people.
I don't think of non-Muslims.
No, I don't see non-Muslims using the term Ramadan Muslims. They just see it as like, oh, no water. That's how they see it. Like, no water, still no water. So I don't think they have the nuance in that.
Who do you feel like uses the term like Ramadan Muslims?
You know, in my circles, I feel like I'm often one of few or the only Muslim in my environment. So I don't hear the term Ramadan Muslim used a whole lot. Maybe when I was younger, when I was going to Islamic school, or just, you know, around the masjid on a more regular basis, I might hear it. I also think, you know, being part of the African American community, I think it can be used in that community more so than others, because I find...
do you feel like against like the community, or do you feel like within the community like...
within/against the community. So I think, as there is in many ethnicities and races, particularly with African American Muslims, I think, you have a pretty diverse spread of people in how they practice their faith. You might find African Americans with like the most Muslim names, like Khalid, Rashid, Abdul Harun. Like you might have the most, Arab name, but then they're like, no, it's actually Khalid. And so I think in those circles I might hear Ramadan Muslim used a little bit more.
Do you guys ever feel like guilt like during the month of Ramadan, like at all?
For sure, yeah. And I think perhaps a healthy amount of guilt, I'd say, hopefully. I know, speaking for myself, I'm not perfect, I never will be. I fall short every day, and so I think I do feel guilt in ways that I fall short of, reaching my goals or aspirations, particularly in the month of Ramadan. And like, I think specifically about the fact that like, the shaitan is chained, he's away, so it's just on me.
Exactly. I think that's exactly it. Like, it's the pressure of like, it's not the bigger shaitans are all chained away. So so when it's like times where I'm like, oh, like I'm gonna struggle getting up for Fajr, it's more so in Ramadan, because like I guess there's an excuse outside of it, but like in Ramadan I feel like there's a lot of pressure to succeed and do it properly, and I feel like even that's where the Ramadan Muslim that's kind of where it has its I don't know, it's back in or whatever. But yeah, I do feel like slightly a little bit of guilt during Ramadan because of like the ways that I struggle outside of Ramadan. Inside Ramadan, it feels harsher judgment that I have on myself, even though it's the same Allah, like both in and out of Ramadan.
Right. Yeah.
Like the mercy is still there.
That's a good way of putting it. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, and I've felt this before as well, more so when I was younger, but this pressure to be perfect or to not even try.
Like the all or nothing.
All or nothing.
Yeah, black and white.
And I think that's very unhealthy.
Yeah, because Islam doesn't ask for like perfection, and perfecting it, I feel like, is not Islam. Like it's not asking for you to perfect your deen. It's asking for
just
you
to
try
make that extra effort.
to make that extra effort.
It's a shame.
It's just judgment and shame culture.
Yeah, shame culture, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you think the divide between Muslims has contributed to the coining of the term?
When you say divide between Muslims, could you like speak more about that? Like I think there's a lot of divides.
Yeah.
I
Is it
think
like the sects? Is it?
I think like more the divide like between like those that are more practicing to those that are less practicing. People like liberal Muslims, more conservative Muslims. Do you feel like I'm talking about like the divide like in that like in that way?
Like, does it contribute to the term Ramadan Muslim?
To the term Ramadan Muslims, do you feel like?
I mean, maybe if we're talking about conservatism, if it's like conservatism, like I don't know. I don't know.
So my parents are converts, and I think about that as a bit of a divide between people who are born into the faith and those who choose it, and oftentimes, if you have a new convert, they're very passionate about the deen, they're very enthused, they're very inspired, but they might not have like all of the knowledge quite yet. And so I think sometimes if you have people who are generational Muslims or have been Muslim from the time of their birth looking at new converts, that might contribute to the use of the term Ramadan Muslim, and that someone's maybe experiencing their first Ramadan ever. So they are a Ramadan, that is a Ramadan Muslim. My mother took her Shahada during the month of Ramadan. So I think sometimes there can be some judgment or use of the term there.
Yeah, I think it's also similar to people that have like just come back to Islam. Like I have like, obviously I've had family members where they've just kind of come back to Islam, and then that first Ramadan, it's like everything must be completely different and they're going charging, but they're also like kind of harming like the people around them as well that maybe didn't have this like new epiphany that they've just gotten, and they've become really, really strict on it and like really harsh and judgment on other people. I feel like that as well can be like the Ramadan Muslim. Like on the other side, the people that are like, maybe they're not doing as well, or like they're going on their timeline, but then there's like the other side of like the Ramadan Muslim where it's like you're going full force, and, but it's a positive, and then the other sides of it being like a negative.
So like loneliness, like what's it called again? Like I feel like a lot of people forget about like the loneliness that some people may feel during the month of Ramadan, especially for those that may not have a community. So what is community to you guys in the month of Ramadan when you don't have one?
I struggle with that one because I think between last Ramadan and this Ramadan, it's very stark contrast from my experience. So last year during Ramadan, I was one of 2 Muslims on the campus where I live. And the other Muslim was a student, right? So it was very isolating in that sense. But on the other side of things, I think that was the Ramadan where I was able to read like more Quran than I ever had. And I was really able to, reflect on the Quran in ways that isolation gave me the ability to do that. So it was fulfilling in a different way. Now this year I'm in London for most of Ramadan, and there's a lot of Muslim community here. And so I think there's a different kind of like blessing in that. Perhaps being able to like reflect in community, being able to do dhikr in circles, which is a sunnah in itself. So I think community is always better, but I don't necessarily think that, and I think the way you talk about it is important. You can look at it as isolation, or you can look at it isolation, loneliness, or solitude. I don't necessarily see solitude as a bad thing, because if you think about like those last 10 nights, people are in itikaf, like that's solitude, that's intentional solitude. So I think the way you look at it's important.
When it comes to like loneliness and community, in terms of like the first one, isolation, I feel like I don't have a lot to like put on that, because like me and my family, like we're all from Croydon, and we all live like 5-10 minutes away from each other, and like I've grew up like that. So like there's always someone there for iftar. There's always, if it's not us, then we're going to them, and it's like we're never like, alhamdulillah, I've never like grown up in, or even now, like without family and community. And even if it's not family, it's the friends down the road, it's my neighbours giving us sweets, and they're Sri Lankan, and they will give us like the sweets on Diwali. they will give us the sweets on Eid, Ramadan. Like, I alhamdulillah, like I've been blessed with like constantly having noise, constantly having that like community there celebrating almost every step of the way, and praying with us. And like when we go to Taraweeh, it's literally like I'm just seeing my cousins everywhere. So alhamdulillah.
Do you think social media has had an impact on how you view the month of Ramadan, interpret and practice it?
I find that social media can align a lot with capitalism more so than anything else, and this kind of ethos of productivity over everything else. I can also see that bleeding into Ramadan sometimes, where you're either commercializing it, and it's funny, I actually see that much more here in London than I do back home.
What do you mean? What type of?
Where I'm seeing like the Tesco having Ramadan Mubarak, Ramadan Kareem, the David Lloyd's, like all these big brands are trying to profit off of the Ramadan.
Ramadan calendars, like they have like the Christmas calendars.
So I see social media contributing to that in a way, but also again, speaking to the environment that I'm coming from, I do also find some community in social media, in that I'm constantly being introduced, to new scholars, to people who are just providing more wisdom that I'm not going to access in my small masjid, of 30-40 people, right? Like if you only have that many perspectives, the perspective overall is limited. So I think social media can expand it if used intentionally and wisely.
I think with social media, I feel like the one thing that I've been scrolling on TikTok every so often, And it's just like a lot of people, again, it's the capitalists are pushing Ramadan products. It's the get this Ramadan journal. And so you can get your dhikr up. That shocks me. Like, it's the constant marketing, and it's like, even during Ramadan, like, there's no break. There's no, like, nothing. And it's like all of these Muslim creators pushing it at the forefront, and they know, like, the type of content they make, they know who's watching. So it's like sometimes it can be overwhelming because it's like another place yet again infiltrated by capitalism. But again, there's also the good sides of it. There's people reminding you about certain du'as to say at what time, praying that prayer like between after Isha and just before like Fajr, like that being the perfect time and whatnot. But but sometimes it can just be overwhelming, I think.
One thing I'll also add, I forgot to mention this, is just comparison. I think I work with kids, I work in a school, and social media hurts kids so much, and it's because they're comparing themselves to others at a rate that's not, we as humans, we have not evolved to do that. And I think the same can apply to like Ramadan content. To us thinking like, I have to be like this for Ramadan. I have to pray every sunnah. I have to make dhikr all day, right? And holding ourselves to unrealistic standards or expectations.
I think it's like the videos that people make, like spend the day with me during Ramadan, and then like you're seeing the entire day. But most of the time, like, it's just social media. They've just edited it to look like they've done everything, and maybe it was over 4 days. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it looks like they did all of that in one day, and so it does like contribute to the unrealistic standards and perfectionism of like what Ramadan is supposed to be. So like I feel like staying off social media, maybe like off social media, especially for like the younger people.
And most of those creators have all the time in the world. They're not working.
They're
not necessarily like having to take care of kids and do all this stuff.
It's completely unrealistic.
It's different.
How can we make for a better Ramadan environment amongst non-Muslims?
I struggle with that one because I think I've lived most of my time around non-Muslims or in spaces that aren't majority Muslim. And I think at some points in my life I've really been committed to, I have to let people know what the month is all about, etc. I need to educate others, and now I find myself really falling back, to be honest. I don't feel the need to try and explain, to justify. It's just kind of like, look guys, I'm not going to be at lunch.
Just matter of factly, like there's no going around anymore, like, because I guess maybe going back, because of social media, because of the era that we are in, if you don't know yet what Ramadan is, you don't care,
right?
And that's okay.
Exactly.
That's your life.
Yes.
That's okay.
Don't ask me something that Google or ChatGPT can answer for you.
Exactly. That's
Yeah, I don't expect a lot out of non-Muslim communities during Ramadan, to be honest. And again, it's different here than it is back in Central Virginia, whereas here, because Muslim numbers are just higher, non-Muslims know more. They're more aware. Back home, no, people don't know much. They're ignorant.
No, definitely. I feel like even in the workplace, like over here, like they'll send out a little, email like, guys, like it's the month of Ramadan. Be mindful at lunchtime.
I guess.
What do you guys think makes a successful Ramadan?
Sustainability is the first thing that comes to my mind. Is maybe implementing something new into your life that you can sustain outside of the month of Ramadan. That's very aspirational, but that to me feels like something that makes for a successful Ramadan, whether that's, picking up your tasbih after, making dhuhr. Like if it's that small and you can sustain it after the month is over, that's a success to me. Whereas realistically, I'd say that most Muslims can do more during the month, but very few can can make
keep
it.
it last like throughout the year.
Yeah. So
No,
even if it's something
definitely.
small, that's a success.
No, definitely. I think that's also like the kind of like stance that I've taken. And before, I was very much on the perfectionism, with my family, like living with my family and whatnot. But like now, I've kind of just stopped and taken it down to like the basics, because I feel like I've struggled quite a lot. So like now it's come to kind of, I want to say like my first Ramadan, this Ramadan. I've taken it back down to the basics, and like I'm just wanting to add just a little bit to make it sure that I complete the fast, I complete the entire Ramadan, just so that I've done it, and then I add just a little bit, and then that's like, for me, that's my success. That's my success to Ramadan. But it's a very personal like experience for everyone.
And I think engage with the Quran in some way. That I think for me that feels very important. And I know people say that all the time, but not even necessarily saying, you have to go memorize a new juz during Ramadan. Even if you're just reflecting on the transliteration of the Quran, or you're listening to some tafsir, it's not just the month of fasting, it's the month of the Quran. So I think that is really important in thinking about what success is.
What's your, like, what do you define as your personal like success for Ramadan?
Oh, as my personal success for Ramadan? I think my personal success for Ramadan is like actually like working on like my personal connection like with God, and trying to be a better version like of a Muslim.
What does Ramadan feel like as you age versus, one when you're a child, a teenager, and then as an adult?
I can really feel like the difference, like especially this Ramadan. I can really like feel like the massive difference in like from like how I experience, in the way that I experienced Ramadan from when I was a child until now. Like for example, as a child I feel like, I really got to experience like the joy of Ramadan, like being with my family, and like, like it genuinely like felt like a month like I would look forward to. I don't know, but I feel like this month I can really like feel the gender roles. I feel like, especially like as a woman in Ramadan, it may not be the same like within every culture, but I feel like for certain like for certain minorities, I feel like, you can really feel, I don't know, like the difference in the way that men and women experience Ramadan. Women like for some women, they will be typically, spending large periods of the time to, cook and, create like massive banquets for the men in the household. And I feel like for men, they get to really like immerse themselves within the month, and like, make extra ibadah, make those extra like nafil prayers, but I feel like for women, I don't know.
I get what you're saying. Like, I feel like sometimes I do feel anxious when Ramadan's coming up, because it can just be like, it's the month of cooking. And that's mad for it to be like that, sort of have that perception of Ramadan when it's actually the month of prayer. It's the month of like your spirit. But instead I'm like, I'm gonna have to like cook constantly, and I'm gonna have to clean whilst I'm also fasting, and because of the gender roles in like, I'm Somali, and the gender roles in our household is like, the boys, they will go out, they'll pray, they come home, they'll do whatever they need to do, but they're tired and they're fasting, and they can't clean. But you do it anyway, so you might as well clean. And it's the gender roles outside Ramadan, but it's like the pressure is insane, because our bodies are also tired, and it just feels like it's just misogyny that and it's so frustrating, and it's very hurtful. But it does just feel like the month of cooking, and then the men, they sit down on the table and they kind of just wait for the food to be put onto the table, and it
feel like the whole month is just like about like these meals, like when you're like just like constantly preparing, and
it's the lead up to the meal. Everything can be it's just the lead up to the meal. It's just we're waiting for iftar. Like you're not actually doing Ramadan, you're just waiting for iftar. Like you start at 1 p.m. doing the samosas. You've taken the thing out to freeze. I mean to defrost, and then you're cutting up large portions of everything, right? And it takes hours, and especially now that iftar is much like it's just now 6 p.m. now. So that's like the entire day. Like at least when it was later, you did actually have a little bit of time to do your prayers and whatnot and your extra stuff that you want to do. But now that it's so early, everything is so cramped, and it's like it's made it even harder. So I think maybe that's another thing, like Ramadan during the summer, not during when it gets closer to like the winter time. I assume like it will get even more harder, like as a woman being in the house.
That's so interesting, because I think I definitely experienced that as a kid. Seeing my mother cook more, and in full candor, my mom is not like she's not one who takes that much pride in her cooking. Like she obviously wants it to be good, but she's not like homemaker is not her first identity, if that makes sense. So for me growing up, where I would look back to, my stepfather, I would go, sometimes my younger brothers, they were pretty young at that time, but just like being out for like a long period of time for Tarawih, meanwhile, my mom's usually at home. Probably because she's taking care of the babies. So that to me feels like a really tricky one, especially because of the fact like Tarawih is not sunnah. It's not something that is.
It's not sunnah, but yet it's still a privilege.
It's a privilege.
Yeah.
Right. It's a major privilege.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we make it more difficult than it needs to be. Whereas, like, it's the month of Ramadan, you're gaining multiplied barakah for everything that you do. And yes, there is this like idea, the longer you stand in prayer, the better. But I really like, shout out Rumis, I love having shorter Tarawih. I think that there's a real beauty in that, because people have families back home, people have lives, people have things they need to attend to, and inshallah achieve barakah through those things as well, because that's really important. And then back to the joy piece, I think that's so important. I think that's one thing that I'm so grateful for as a kid, having joy in the Ramadan, whether that's going to various events, in the communities, like I said, iftar at home was not the biggest deal, so maybe going out to iftar somewhere else. And then especially like Eid. I mean, Eid as a kid was amazing. But then I contrast that to as an adult, whereas that joy that was, I'd say, gifted to me, that allows me to carry my practice and passion for Ramadan into adulthood. But now it shifts, because I'm now just taking what is core to the month. What is core, because, it's like I'm not around family. There's not a very vibrant Muslim community around me. And I, back to Sunnah, like I think of like the Sahaba, what were their Ramadans like? It was not probably not the most joy, right? And so I think sometimes we're saying we make it all about the meal, or we make it all about the activities and things like that. But no, it was a month of challenge. It's a month of bringing yourself closer to Allah and pushing yourself away from the material. And so in my adulthood, I find myself feeling a bit more of that than I did as a kid.
And that is really beautiful, because again, focusing on like the meal at the end of the day and making that like the come up until the meal, it is excessive. It is excessive, especially during Ramadan, when it's meant to be like the month where you're just genuinely thinking about everything that you're grateful for, and like kind of stripping your life back and just making it corely about your spirit, your spiritual connection to Allah and your deen. Like being in like solitude sometimes is actually very like useful, or it's helpful in terms of like keeping Ramadan going. But yeah, I think making the whole fiasco about the food and inviting everyone constantly all the time, it's an event after event after event, like that's not like what it is. and we've just made it like an Eid over 30 days.
Wow, yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
It's true.
And it's very overwhelming. It's very overwhelming.
So like in summary, like Ramadan should be like about like intention, and you should actively be working. Everybody should be a Ramadan Muslim, you know? Like Ramadan is about like, you know, being the best version that you can, and inshallah like you're able to take those, you know, those habits that you've developed like in the month and carry it through the rest of the year, you know. So it's a shame that like it's been used like so negatively, like, you know, towards people that are taking that extra step to become a better version of themselves. So I don't know, I think everybody should be a Ramadan Muslim.
I think there will be stuff that sticks, and no matter what, it's a positive. They're not gonna be after Ramadan. You're not the same person as you were before, no matter how you practiced it. Whether you are the Ramadan Muslim or you weren't, like you do leave Ramadan with something like useful
And there's something metaphysical that calls us to do that in Ramadan. I mean, speaking from my own experience, there are times in my life where I wasn't praying, where I was doing all kinds of haram, but Ramadan comes around, I said, I gotta pray. You know, there's a real beauty in that. So I fully agree. Like, there should be some kind of embrace of, this month is different.
It is different, everyone should be a Ramadan Muslim. I like that.
Like, maybe like, what's your Ramadan nightmare? Like, what's like a horrible experience you've had during Ramadan?
What is a horrible experience I've had during Ramadan?
Like, I think about as a kid, like having like football practice, getting home, you know, breaking my fast, going to sleep, and then waking up and seeing the sun again.
Oh,
like missing Sahur as a kid, that was like the most brutal.
Yeah, because now you can subjugate to starvation. Like that's what it felt like. Like now you're done, and now you've got to go to school.
Ramadan as a kid
now you've got
very difficult.
First class.
It's very difficult because you can't like. I mean, you can maybe fake sick or something like that. At least as an adult, like you can kind of like, you know, step back from work a little bit, kind of ask for some grace. As a kid, it's like, no, you're there from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Yeah, it was a sentence.
It's a
sentence, to say the least. I feel like obviously, like I have to say this, like as a woman, like and as when I was like, you know, pre-puberty, I guess. I'm fasting. This is like one of my like first or third fasts, and it's like, you know, I'm doing so well, and it's like like an hour to breaking my fast, and then like the menstrual cycle begins, and then I'm like, dang, like I was so close. And I was like extra days to make up, but it's always so heartbreaking when you're just like, oh, there was only an hour left, and it was like the 9 to 10 p.m. like iftar days. And it's like, I starved the entire day.
That's brutal.
Like, finish. For absolute niche. Like, obviously, like, Allah knows our intention. But, like, we're going to have to make it back.
Wow.
That's the sentence. That's the real sentence.
Making up days, I feel for y'all as women, seriously. Because making up days is so difficult.
It's difficult. Because you always have to, like, I mean, personally, winter, December times, best times. It's 4 p.m. It's 4 p.m. Maghrib. It's light work.
I think there's a peer pressure. Like during Ramadan, it's like, well, everyone's fasting. Like even if I'm a little bit sick, I'm like, I should still fast. Even if I'm traveling, I'm like, I know it's gonna be easier now when I know everyone else is.
Exactly.
Or is this just me?
Yeah, right. Like I feel like it is harder to do it outside of Ramadan. And obviously, that's my Ramadan trauma.
Take turns with Taraweeh.
I think that's actually quite an important, like, I never thought about it until like I was having this discussion, how like dramatic iftar is. When iftar is actually like the fun part of it is a date and water. How dramatic, how excessive, how gluttonous.
It could be a normal dinner.
It's like a normal dinner.
I'm on strike.
That's how it was for me
personally,
growing
I'm on
up.
strike.
Honestly.
So exhausting.
That's how it was.
if Sam, are you gonna join being on strike with me?
Oh, well, I am on strike. I've been on strike.
Yeah.
I've been on strike.
Yeah. We were talking about going on strike earlier.
Yeah.
This is a real strike.
Yeah.
This is mobilizing women.
It's Sambusa strike.
Like
Sambusa strike.
This is Sambusa Malawa strike. I love it. The Sambusa Malawa combo is elite though. I will say.
That was so funny. But yes.
Mm.
Thank you.
Ramadan Mubarak.
I pledge.
I pledge.